Hey there team, and welcome back to the channel, and welcome to something a little bit lighter. Steam Next Fest has kicked off, and look, in a time where there are some issues with the gaming industry, and I am quite happy to call them out, on the other hand, we should also celebrate the good that's being done. And I think one of the best modern changes in the gaming space has been the demo craze, at least on Steam. I can't really speak to consoles. Early access is something I have a great grievance with because it is abused to the nth degree, with launching essentially a tech build of a game, taking the full price money for it and stopping production is becoming more and more of a common occurrence. It's good to see things like this festival celebrating demos. Perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. For those that aren't across it, Next Fest is essentially where everyone just comes together, bangs a whole bunch of free demos on Steam that you can go in and try out yourself. It's so incredibly consumer focused, and I need to make more of an effort showcasing demos and shouting out Next Fest in general, which happens now multiple times a year. I think it's like every quarter, it might be even more often now. So without further ado, here are 3 games that I've knocked over, and look, let me know what you think, because I'm keen to keep chipping away at what else is there. Maybe we do a whole series of this over the course of the next week. Just shouting out interesting little finds. And also, drop us a comment. Let us know if there's something that's in there that you've found as well. There's quite a glut of cool games to try out, and I can't try everything, sadly. So let me know what you're interested in. All right, first up is Shapez 2. This might be the most obscure one that I'm covering today, but my god, this is gameplay distilled. I've made it very clear my grievances with, narratives and all that sort of stuff in the common market. We don't necessarily need to retread it here, but this is Factorio-esque efficiency, logistics management distilled down to an absolute art. The first game, Shapez 1, which I went back and checked out on the back of this, still holds up. However, it's one of those things, once Shapez 2 comes out, it has iterated and built upon it in every way. It will make it very difficult to go back to the first game. So check this out, check out the demo yourself. At its core, the loop is still exactly the same. It's just been overhauled, not just graphically, but mechanically since the first game. Things like conveyor belts being able to merge as opposed to having to use a merging tool. That might seem like a small thing, but it actually changes the entire dynamic significantly. But essentially, you're trying to run conveyor belts from extraction sites, pulling out shapes and colors and all sorts of things. There's different ways that it changes. And what might start out as simple as just getting a circle out of the extractor and putting it into the goal, as it were, quickly evolves into, well, maybe I want a half a circle. So you need to cut it with a cutting tool. Well, maybe I need it at I don't know if orientation is going to matter so much here. It did in the first game because it was in a forced perspective on a 2-degree Cartesian plane. But here you'll get things like, half a circle. What about 3/4 of a circle? And then you get to the point where you can only cut a circle in half. So you have to perhaps cut it in half so it goes into quarters, and then merge a quarter with a half. Then you get hybrid shapes. You get things like, let's have diagonal circles and diagonal squares, that sort of thing. And all of a sudden, your factory just becomes overwhelmingly huge. And then there's a tech tree built in, so you'll have your main objective pushing the game forward, but then your tech tree will be demanding other shapes as well. But yeah, look, ultimately, very simple to understand and explain, but it's one of those things trying to eke out another percentage of efficiency just to get that throughput right. Again, like I said, I returned to the first game just to retread, just to see where it's at, and things like the efficiency feed or output or readability or whatever you'd like to call it is infinitely better in Shapez 2 so far. At a click, you can just find out what a belt speed is or a machine speed is. Is it throughputing 60 bits per second? And even just clicking on a thing, it will do a sample. If you let it pass through like half a dozen shapes, it will tell you in real time, relatively real time, it needs a sample size over like 5 seconds, what the throughput is. This game is really looking brilliant, and I had to force myself to put it down because I know I'm going to play it at release. So, delayed gratification. Check it out. All right, next up is probably one of the more anticipated games, Pacific Drive, it's coming out this month, in fact, 2 weeks away. So you might as well, build the hype train around it. This is probably the most requested game on the channel, and I very much plan on looking at it at launch. I played a bit of the demo. I never actually played the preview build, but it's looking like sort of a survival run-based. It seems that they're avoiding using terms like roguelike, and I think it's more longer form. You know, when you cross the line from roguelike into, say, RPG. So this is more survival, dare I say survival horror, where you're maintaining your car and driving around picking up objectives. I played enough just to know how it works functionally. Again, I think most people that have seen this, especially if you gravitate to my channel, you're probably interested in it already. The main takeaways that I will convey from getting hands-on is I played it mouse and keyboard, and it works outrageously well with mouse and keyboard. I actually, for whatever reason, do like the idea of keyboard car controls in first person where you can use a mouse to look around. However, given the state of digital versus analog input, thumbsticks versus WASD keyboard 1.0, the fidelity of driving a car with WSAD is usually pretty bad. But surprisingly, for whatever reason, however they manage to do it, it works really well. It feels really good. You know, compare that to something like Cyberpunk or whatever. I really do want to drive that first person with a keyboard, but it's kind of a bit miserable. The UI I find jarring. I'm a real UI nut, and this UI looks like the Starfield UI. I get that they're going for an aesthetic, this sort of almost Apple IIe adjacent readout sort of thing, but even in the short time I played it, I find it a bit tiring. Again, and I say it again and again, you're really rolling the dice when you design your UI within the in-world sort of graphical style. I don't think there's anything wrong with a menu being fourth wall breaking, because it is fourth wall breaking. Just have clean, readable text. But I don't need to rant about that here. But yeah, the UI is a bit jarring. I'm also actually a bit skeptical about the loop and the mechanics. Big focus in what I played on like panel beating, essentially. I'm not sure if it really gets into sort of engine. Do you change out the transmission? Do you get into the bloody camshaft? You know, that sort of stuff. I feel like maybe you won't, not to the granular level that maybe I'm used to. This seems to be getting a lot of mainstream appeal, which I like. And we've seen things like that. We got sort of indie essence games. Returnal's one that comes to mind, that get into the mainstream, and they kind of dumb it down, but probably for the betterment of everyone, the genre, everything. But this game seemed pretty focused on all the doors, front left panel, bumper, that sort of thing, and the repairs seem to consist of either build it or throw some magic bloody putty paste on it. So I will be honest, I was kind of expecting more. If I sat you down and said, hey, what if you did a medieval bloody hedge knight simulator, and your dude, part of the loop is managing and maintaining 15 pieces of armor set, you probably would go, that sounds kind of cool. But then if I told you it was literally like just press one button to craft and repair, and you know, it's not like you're polishing it or shining it or buffing it out. I'm surprised that we don't have that in this, that you're not using a dolly to buff out the panels or anything like that. So it's a cool idea, but I do worry that it might just be grindy. Sorry, I hope I'm not hurting anyone's feelings by speaking out against this game. I myself am still quite hyped to play it, but I was a little bit put off by the low fidelity of the crafting around your car. But check the demo out yourself anyway. It's on Steam now. Make your own decision. One last little red flag on it is writing, is voices. Look, it's nothing too bloody progressive or over the top or browbeating, but already in the first like half an hour to hour, whatever I played enough to know. You got 3 people on a headset screaming at you, cracking jokes, passing narrative. And look, nothing about it was overly offensive other than the fact that they're just talking non-stop. And the game was at its strongest in the opening 10 minutes, where you're driving through the rain, turning on your windscreen wiper, it's ambient sound and environment and listening to the rain patter, and I just don't understand why games can't go back to what Half-Life 2 still is the king of. And honestly, nothing against Half-Life 2, but that shouldn't be the case. Silent protagonists, immersive, deafeningly silent ambient noise. Games, please. It's not even just the virtual signaling writing and all that. It's the writing full stop. It's the dialogue. Sack half your writers or half their bloody hours or whatever and just let us play a game. I'm not worried about someone just parroting in my ear non-stop. Last one's Homeworld 3, probably the most high-profile game. This is interesting. So at first blush, hands-on, Like there's a fairly robust tutorial and there's like a multiplayer mode, but the tutorial in this sort of game is kind of necessary and it's kind of involved as well. It goes through the camera controls. Homeworld's always been a tricky one. The original Homeworld's really pioneered managing fleets and that in 3D space. They were quite ahead of the curve. And this has an unusual control scheme, which I don't want to speak too soon, but it's actually really intuitive and works well around using WASD, but essentially having right-click hold as a toggle to control your camera around. You're sort of zooming around as a first-person drone, and you can lock into squads and roll with them as they fight and orbit. And what I'm getting at is it's unusual. At first, it's a little bit unwieldy, but very quickly you start to realize this actually might be a really big step forward for things like this, RTS's 3D space type controls. So I found that actually really promising, if not jarring. It's all the bones are in here, all the DNA is here. It's Homeworld at its core. To say that if you didn't like Homeworld, you're not going to like this. But the same building systems, control systems, spacebar to go into the bloody overworld thing, it's all there, right? Now, I'm not a huge Homeworld simp. I came to the party late, and I personally really liked Deserts of Carrick, which was done by the same guys, Blackbird, and they've done this as well. So all the aesthetic, art, controls, it all feels like coming home, and I guess that's what you probably want to hear. Again, try all this out for yourself. I'll bathtub curve and say one thing. Something jarringly absent from this game is any narrative, any campaign whatsoever. And to me, that is in fact a red flag. These guys are Blackbird Interactive, and the last big game that they did was Hard Space Shipbreaker. Famously, especially on this channel, because I was the hard space guy for a bit of a time there, brilliant game, fantastic loop. And a few months before launch, they employed a bunch of hack writers to push bullshit into the story. I don't want to necessarily retread, but they upset a lot of the core base, being that it was people like me, people with a technical mind that are interested in cutting apart ships and solving that puzzle, and I didn't really want to get browbeat over the head about unions and all this sort of bullshit. So have they learned from that, or are they going to double down? Honestly, devil's advocate, if I was a company that was going to try and pull this bullshit again, I probably wouldn't put any campaign, anything in the demo like they've done now. Am I assuming the worst? I kind of am, right? But I'll eat my words if it's not there, and it's just a good old-fashioned story. From what I recall, Deserts of Carrick, which was before Hard Space, was actually really good. And I don't think there are any particular red flags in that story. It's been a while since I played it. And of course, not to forget, this multiplayer mode is really unusual and should be a lot of fun. It's kind of a roguelike co-op multiplayer mode. It reminds me, in a way, this is a deep stretch. Do you remember Dawn of War 2 had that sort of hero co-op wave-based mode? It was sort of like a multiplayer lobby roguelike that took that mechanic. Well, this sort of does the same thing. You pick your starting nominal fleet and you're harvesting in that within this region. You've got some missions to do and there's waves of bad guys. I had to rescue some space cars and the enemy was trying to take them off me as well. And you unlock relics, which are like roguelike optional upgrades. So, you know, get 3 choices and pick one up. The fleet that I started with was like a heavy recon. So it started with mutators, very big on the recon scouts, but less so on the frigates. So this actually really excites me. This RTS roguelike that's co-op. I had no idea this was in it, and it seems promising. So yeah, a lot of really good stuff going on here. But again, I'd be really curious, because 90% of people playing this are going to do it for the campaign, and it kind of worries me that there's absolutely zero indication of what the campaign is at all. And look, the optimist in me will close out and say, maybe it's just that they want to avoid spoilers, which, you know, fingers crossed. Anyway, they're the 3 games that I've tried out on Next Fest, and I think they're all pretty cool. It's a very exciting time for gaming with these coming around the corner. There's a whole bunch of other things I wouldn't mind checking out. Again, if there are cool demos that you found in there that you maybe want me to have a look at, or you'd suggest, write your piece, chuck a comment, let me know. But at the very least, log on, check it out for yourself, and get around Next Fest. Not everything about supporting gaming industry has to be about tearing down the bad actors. We should also rise up the good culture, and Next Fest is exactly that. Next Fest is what we want, and we should rally around it. Anyway, team, might just leave it there for the time being, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.